I always believed that love was about effort, that it wasn't something that just happened, but something you worked for, something you nurtured and protected. That was the kind of love I thought I had with Laura. From the moment we met, everything between us felt natural, easy. She had this way of drawing people in, her presence, her charm, the way she could make a room feel warmer just by being in it. I was no exception. I met Laura when I was 28, a few years into my career. She was 26, fresh out of school, and working as an interior designer. I was instantly drawn to her confidence. She had an eye for detail, a way of making even the most ordinary things seem special. It wasn't long before I fell for her, and within 2 years, we were married. We built a life together, one that I thought was filled with love and stability. I worked in finance, climbing the corporate ladder, putting in long hours to secure our future. Laura, on the other hand, had a passion for creating beautiful spaces. She took on projects that excited her, transforming homes and businesses with her talent. She loved what she did, and I loved seeing her light up when she talked about it. Our home was a reflection of her, elegant, well put together, and full of life. Every room held a piece of her creativity, every corner designed with intention. She had carefully chosen everything, from the colors on the walls to the furniture that filled our spaces. It was more than just a house. It was the life we had built together. Financially, we were comfortable. I wasn't rich, but I earned enough for us to live well. We traveled occasionally, enjoyed nice dinners, and indulged in little luxuries when we could. Laura never had to worry about money, and that gave me a sense of pride. I wanted to be the kind of husband who provided, who made sure she never felt like she was missing out on anything. Our marriage had its ups and downs, like any relationship. We argued over small things, who forgot to do the dishes, why she spent so much time on her phone, why I worked late so often, but we always found our way back to each other. At least, that's what I thought. Looking back, those years were some of the happiest of my life. I believed we were building something solid, something that would last forever. I never imagined that anything could break it. If someone had asked me back then what made our marriage strong, I would have given them a simple answer: balance. Laura and I complemented each other in ways that made life feel effortless. She was the dreamer, the one who could turn an empty space into something beautiful, while I was the planner, the one who made sure we could afford the life we wanted. Together, we created something that felt real, something I thought would stand the test of time. Our routines were well established. I woke up early for work, often leaving before Laura even stirred. She wasn't a morning person, so I would always set the coffee machine the night before, knowing she'd appreciate waking up to a fresh pot. It was a small gesture, but one of the many things I did because I loved her. Evenings were our time. No matter how busy the day had been, I made sure to be home for dinner whenever possible. Sometimes, Laura would cook, surprising me with new recipes she had found online. Other times, we would order takeout and eat on the couch, watching whatever show we were obsessed with at the moment. It wasn't extravagant, but it was ours. Weekends were a mix of relaxation and socializing. Laura loved going out, brunches with friends, art galleries, shopping for new design inspirations. I didn't always understand her excitement over furniture and color palettes, but I enjoyed watching her talk about something she was passionate about. When I had the time, I would join her on her outings, but just as often, I let her enjoy those moments with her friends while I caught up on work or household projects. We were never the kind of couple who needed to be together every second of the day. We had our own interests, our own worlds that sometimes ran parallel, but always found their way back to each other. I thought that was a sign of a strong marriage, two independent people choosing each other over and over again. Of course, there were moments of tension. Laura sometimes resented my long hours, claiming I put work ahead of our relationship. I, on the other hand, felt the pressure of providing for us, of making sure we had the future we had dreamed about. I always thought she understood that, even when she sighed as I answered late-night emails or took calls during dinner. Still, I never once doubted her love for me. Even in our quiet moments, when neither of us was saying much, there was a comfort in knowing she was there. I had no idea that beneath the surface, something was shifting, that the life we had built, the routines we had settled into, were already beginning to crack. Looking back, I wonder when the first cracks truly began to form. At the time, they were easy to ignore, small, almost insignificant moments that didn't seem like anything more than the natural ebb and flow of a long-term relationship. But now, with the clarity that hindsight brings, I can see them for what they were. Warnings. Laura had always been affectionate in her own way. She wasn't overly clingy, but she showed love through small touches, through little acts of care. Running her fingers through my hair absent-mindedly, resting her hand on my leg during car rides, sending me texts during the day just to check in. I didn't realize it at first, but those moments had started to fade. At first, I blamed it on stress. She had been taking on more high-end clients, projects that demanded more of her time and energy. Some days, she came home exhausted, barely saying more than a few words before retreating to a long bath or scrolling through her phone. It made sense. I had been there before, so caught up in work that everything else felt secondary. I told myself she just needed space, that things would balance out again like they always did. But then there were the other changes, the ones that weren't so easy to explain. She started dressing differently. Laura had always been stylish, but now she was paying more attention to how she looked before she left the house. She bought new clothes, ones that accentuated her figure in ways she never seemed to care about before. She spent more time in front of the mirror, fixing her hair, adjusting her outfits. I teased her about it once, asking if she had a secret modeling career I didn't know about. She just laughed and said she wanted to feel good about herself. Then there were the late nights. At first, it was just the occasional client dinner, a meeting that ran longer than expected. But over time, it became more frequent. She would come home later and later, sometimes well past midnight, with vague explanations that didn't quite add up. I got caught up talking with a client. We decided to grab drinks after the meeting. You know how these projects go. Sometimes they just demand extra time. I wanted to believe her. I had no reason not to. I told myself that she was just caught up in her work, that this was temporary, that she would come back to me when things settled down. But then came the phone. Laura had always been open with her devices. We weren't the kind of couple who went through each other's messages, but there was never any secrecy either. If her phone buzzed while she was in the shower, she would ask me to check it for her. If I needed to use it to look something up, she handed it over without hesitation. That changed. Suddenly, her phone was always in her hand, or face down on the table. She started taking it with her everywhere, even to the bathroom. When I walked into the room, she would quickly swipe away whatever she was looking at. If I asked what she was laughing at, she would shrug and say, "Oh, just something silly on Instagram." I started feeling a quiet unease settle in my gut. Something was different, but I couldn't put my finger on what. I had no idea that soon, I would no longer be able to ignore it. That the life I thought we had would soon be shattered beyond repair. I should have trusted my instincts. That nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right had been creeping up on me for weeks, whispering in the back of my mind. But I ignored it, dismissing it as paranoia, as the natural worries of a man who worked too much and maybe wasn't paying as much attention to his wife as he should have. Laura had always been independent, always had her own world separate from mine, and I never wanted to be the kind of husband who suffocated her with suspicion. But love has a way of making you blind, of making you rationalize the things you should question, and that's exactly what I did. Her late nights started becoming routine. At first, they were always work-related. At least, that's what she told me. She had networking events, client dinners, consultations that ran longer than expected. It made sense. She was building her reputation, growing her career. I wanted to be supportive, to trust that she was just doing what she needed to do. But then, the excuses started changing. It wasn't always work anymore. Now, it was grabbing drinks with friends from the industry or catching up with an old colleague she hadn't seen in years. The details were always vague, the explanations just a little too rehearsed, too carefully constructed. I would ask who she was meeting, and she would name people I had never heard of before, people she had never once mentioned in the 7 years we had been together. At first, I brushed it off. I had been busy myself, often exhausted after long days at the office. Maybe she just needed space. Maybe she was reconnecting with parts of herself she had neglected. I told myself not to be insecure, not to turn into one of those husbands who started imagining things just because his wife had a life outside of their home. But then, the changes started to become impossible to ignore. She began putting more effort into her appearance before she went out, spending extra time in front of the mirror, trying on different outfits. She bought new clothes, tighter dresses, heels she had once said were impractical. She started wearing perfume I had only known her to use on special occasions. At first, I joked about it, teasing her that she must have a secret modeling career she hadn't told me about. She laughed it off, kissed my cheek, and told me I was being silly. But it didn't feel silly. It felt like something was shifting, like she was preparing herself for something or someone. Then there were the nights she came home late, slipping into bed without so much as a word. She smelled like perfume and alcohol, but there was something else too, something I couldn't quite name. When I reached for her, she would pull away, mumbling something about being tired. I lay awake in those moments, staring at the ceiling, feeling the growing distance between us stretch like a canyon I couldn't cross. I wanted to believe that this was just a phase, that she was just busy, just overwhelmed. But deep down, I knew better. One night, she left her laptop open on the kitchen counter while she was in the shower. I wasn't looking for anything. I never had a reason to before, but as I walked by, a message notification popped up on the screen. My breath caught in my throat when I saw the words. "Last night was incredible. Can't stop thinking about you." The message was from an unknown contact, and before I could react, the screen faded to black. My stomach dropped. The room felt too small, the walls pressing in on me. I stared at the laptop, willing myself to believe that I had misread it, that it wasn't what it seemed. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe it was an old message. Maybe. No more excuses. I didn't say anything that night. I wanted to. The words burned at the back of my throat, demanding to be spoken. But I needed more than just a message. I needed to be sure before I confronted her, before I shattered whatever remained of the life I thought we had. So instead, I watched. And what I saw made my blood run cold. She had changed her passcode. Her phone was never out of her sight, always in her hand or tucked away in her purse. When she thought I wasn't looking, she would smile at her screen, typing quickly before locking it again. She started staying up later than usual, claiming she just wanted to unwind, but I could see the glow of her phone reflecting in her eyes long after I had gone to bed. Then came the night I heard her whispering in the bathroom. It was past midnight, and I had been drifting in and out of sleep when I noticed the light under the door. The muffled sound of her voice, low and quiet, sent a strange chill down my spine. I got up slowly, my bare feet making no sound against the floor, and stood just outside the door. "I miss you too." The words were soft, almost gentle, but they hit me like a fist to the gut. I felt my hands clench into fists at my sides. My mind raced with 1,000 thoughts, 1,000 possibilities, but only one truth stood out among them. Laura was cheating on me. I didn't know with who. Not yet. But I would find out. And when I did, there would be no coming back from it. Something inside me shifted that night. Standing outside the bathroom door, hearing the whispered words that confirmed what I had been too blind, or too unwilling, to see, I felt something break. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the realization that the life I had built, the love I had poured into this marriage, had been reduced to a lie. I wanted to storm in, demand answers, force her to admit what she had done. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I walked back to bed, lay down, and stared at the ceiling. My heart pounded against my ribs, my mind racing through every interaction, every moment in the past few months that now made horrifying sense. I thought about the late nights, the secrecy, the shift in her behavior, the message on her laptop, the way she had pulled away from me, her husband, while she whispered to someone else in the dead of night. A stranger now held the intimacy that had once belonged to me. But I needed more than suspicion. I needed proof. The next day, I started paying closer attention. I didn't ask questions, didn't press her for details, didn't let her see that anything had changed. Instead, I watched. When she got home from work, I noticed how she kept her phone angled away from me, how she would swipe away notifications the second they appeared. When she left for meetings in the evenings, I checked the time, tracking how long she was gone, trying to piece together where she might be. I started to take mental notes of the patterns, when she left, when she came back, what excuse she gave. I checked our shared calendar on her laptop, looking for anything that might give me a clue. Meetings that didn't make sense, client appointments that seemed too frequent. But there was nothing concrete, just gaps, just absences that she had filled with vague explanations. I needed something more, something undeniable. So, I did what I never thought I would do. I waited until she was in the shower one night, then I took her phone. My hands were shaking as I entered what I hoped was the passcode, my mind racing with the thought that she might catch me at any second. I had never done this before, never even considered it. But when someone shows you who they truly are, you stop playing by the rules. The first thing I saw was that there were no messages. Not a single text, no long conversations with friends or coworkers. It was too clean, too perfect. My stomach twisted. She had deleted them. But why delete messages if there was nothing to hide? I opened her call history. Just like the messages, it was empty, wiped clean. My breathing grew shallow. Laura had never been overly cautious with her phone before, but now it was clear she was covering her tracks. Then I checked her recent apps. One stood out immediately, an encrypted messaging app one had never seen before. I clicked on it, but it required a separate passcode. A dead end. I put the phone back exactly where I found it and walked out of the bedroom, my heart pounding. My mind screamed at me, telling me I had enough proof, that I should confront her right then and there. But another part of me, the part that wanted to watch her crumble under the weight of undeniable evidence, held me back. I didn't just want a confession. I wanted to see the truth with my own eyes. That night, as I lay in bed beside her, I made a decision. If she thought she could hide this from me, she was wrong. I would find out everything. And when I did, she wouldn't see it coming. The hardest part about suspicion is that it poisons everything. Once the thought of betrayal enters your mind, it lingers, twisting even the smallest moments into something sinister. Every look, every word, every action becomes a potential clue, a thread that could unravel the truth. And yet, despite the growing weight of doubt pressing against my chest, I found myself hesitating. I wasn't ready to accept that my wife, the woman I had built a life with, was capable of betraying me. I wasn't ready to know. But the signs were becoming impossible to ignore. Laura had become more distant, though she made an effort to disguise it. She still greeted me when I came home, still smiled when we spoke, but it felt practiced, forced, like she was performing the role of a devoted wife rather than truly being one. When we sat on the couch together, she no longer curled up beside me. When I reached for her hand, she would let me take it but never held on. Our conversations became hollow, filled with polite exchanges but lacking any real connection. She was slipping away from me, and I didn't know how to stop it. The late nights became more frequent, each excuse more unconvincing than the last. She spoke about work in vague terms, throwing in just enough details to make it seem plausible but never enough for me to piece together a full picture. When I asked how her meetings had gone, she would give short answers, it was fine, or nothing exciting. If I pressed, she would sigh and change the subject, as if my curiosity was an annoyance rather than a natural part of being her husband. And then there was her phone. I had always been the kind of person who respected privacy. In all the years we had been together, I had never once felt the need to check her messages or question who she was talking to. But now, I found myself watching her whenever she picked up her phone, noticing the way she would turn the screen away from me, the way she would put it on silent when we were in the same room. Sometimes, she would smile at something she was reading, a soft, secretive expression that I hadn't seen directed at me in a long time. And then, just as quickly as it appeared, the smile would vanish, replaced by indifference. I tried to convince myself that I was being paranoid, that I was letting my fears create a problem where none existed. But deep down, I knew better. One night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I made a decision. I couldn't keep living like this, drowning in uncertainty, feeling like an outsider in my own marriage. I needed answers. So, I started paying closer attention. The next morning, while Laura was in the shower, I opened her laptop. My hands trembled as I navigated to her email, half hoping to find nothing, half expecting to find everything. But there was nothing unusual. No suspicious messages, no hidden conversations. Her inbox was as normal as it had always been. But then, just as I was about to close the screen, I noticed something else, her browsing history. She had been searching for hotels. Expensive ones. My stomach twisted as I clicked through the links, scanning the pages she had visited. Some were in our city, others a few hours away. Some had been checked just once, others multiple times. There were no reservations, no confirmation emails that I could find. But why was she even looking? My mind jumped to possible explanations. Maybe she was planning a surprise getaway for us, an attempt to fix whatever had been broken between us. Maybe she had a client who needed recommendations. Maybe. I stopped myself. No more excuses. I closed the laptop and sat there, gripping the edge of the desk, my thoughts spiraling. If she was planning something for us, Why wouldn't she mention it? And if it wasn't for us, then who was it for? I didn't have the answer yet, but I was getting closer. And I knew that, soon enough, I wouldn't have to search for the truth anymore, because it would reveal itself to me in a way I could never prepare for. The space between us had become impossible to ignore. It wasn't just in the way Laura pulled away from my touch or how she barely looked at me when she spoke. It was in the silence that had crept into every moment we shared. Our conversations had become short, almost mechanical, as if we were just two people coexisting rather than a married couple who had once been deeply in love. She still smiled at me, still said all the right things, but there was a hollowness behind her words. It was like watching a performance, a well-rehearsed act meant to keep up the illusion that nothing had changed. But I felt it. I felt it in the way she no longer laughed at my jokes, in the way she took longer to respond when I spoke to her, in the way she seemed distracted even when we were sitting in the same room. I told myself that maybe she was just stressed, that maybe her work was overwhelming her, that maybe this was just a phase. But deep down, I knew better. Something was wrong, and it wasn't going away. It was the little things that gave her away. The way she started leaving the house earlier in the morning and coming home later at night. The way she suddenly became protective of her phone, keeping it either in her hand or face down on the table at all times. The way she started wearing new lingerie that I never got to see her in. At first, I didn't want to believe what my instincts were screaming at me. I didn't want to be that husband, the one who suspected his wife of cheating just because she was acting a little different. But the weight in my chest only grew heavier with each passing day, and soon, it wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was something else. Something undeniable. One evening, as she got ready to leave for yet another business dinner, I watched her from the doorway of our bedroom. She stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the straps of a black dress I had never seen before. It was elegant, form-fitting, designed to draw attention. She reached for a bottle of perfume, the one she only used on special occasions. "You're really working late a lot these days," I said, keeping my voice as casual as I could. Laura barely hesitated as she fastened her earrings. "Yeah, it's been a busy season. Clients are demanding as hell." I nodded, forcing a small smile. "Where's the dinner?" She grabbed her purse and glanced at her phone before answering. "That French place downtown, the one with the overpriced wine list." I kept my expression neutral, even though I already knew she was lying. I had checked her browsing history earlier that day. There were no restaurant searches, no work-related emails confirming a reservation. Only one thing had stood out. A Google Maps search for a luxury apartment complex on the other side of the city. I wanted to confront her right then and there, to demand she tell me who she was really meeting, but I held back. Not yet. If I accused her now, she would find a way to twist it, to make me seem like the insecure, overthinking husband. I needed something solid. I needed proof. So, I let her go. I watched as she walked out the door, her heels clicking against the floor, leaving behind only the fading scent of her perfume. The moment I heard the car pull out of the driveway, I reached for my phone. I had one idea left. And if I was right, I was about to uncover a truth I wouldn't be able to ignore. Something had changed in me. It wasn't just suspicion anymore, it was certainty. I still had no concrete proof, nothing I could hold in my hands, but I felt it. It was in the way Laura barely looked at me anymore, the way she always seemed to be somewhere else, even when she was sitting right next to me. It was in the hesitation before she spoke, the distant, polite tone she had started using when she said goodnight. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was being paranoid, but the feeling wouldn't go away. It sat heavy in my chest, pressing down on me with every passing day. I wasn't sleeping well anymore. My nights were restless, spent staring at the ceiling while Laura lay beside me, her back always turned. Sometimes, I would hear the soft tap of her fingers against her phone screen, see the faint glow of it lighting up her face in the dark. She thought I was asleep. I let her think that, but I knew she wasn't just scrolling mindlessly. There was someone on the other end of that screen, someone who had her attention in a way I no longer did. The emotional distance was one thing. The physical distance was worse. Weeks had passed since she had touched me in any meaningful way. It was always, "I'm too tired," or "not tonight. I have an early morning." At first, I had taken her excuses at face value, but now, they felt like a cover. A carefully constructed wall to keep me at arm's length while she gave herself to someone else. And then there were the late nights. The work meetings, the networking events, the last-minute texts about changes in her schedule. She had always had a career that kept her busy, but now it was different. Before, She would tell me details, who she was meeting, what the project was about, how long she expected to be out. Now, her explanations were vague, full of pauses and half-hearted justifications. She was lying to me. I didn't need proof to know that. I could hear it in her voice. One evening, I decided to test her. She had just finished getting ready for another supposed business dinner. I watched as she stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the neckline of a dress I had never seen before, applying perfume she used to reserve for special occasions. It took everything in me to keep my voice steady. "Who are you meeting?" I asked casually from the doorway. She didn't even flinch. "Just some people from work. It's nothing exciting." "Where's the dinner?" "That little French place downtown. The one with the overpriced wine list." I nodded as if that answer satisfied me. But it didn't, because I had already checked the restaurant's reservations earlier that day. Her name wasn't on the list. Neither was her company's. She was lying to my face. I watched her finish getting ready, every movement precise, practiced, effortless. It was second nature to her now, this performance. The act of dressing up, walking out the door, and leaving me behind without a second thought. She didn't hesitate, didn't falter, didn't show an ounce of guilt. This was routine for her. I waited until she was gone before I reached for my phone. This time, I wasn't just going to sit around drowning in my own thoughts. I wasn't going to stare at the clock, waiting for her to come home with another lie. I needed to see what was really happening. I checked the tracking app we had installed on our shared car years ago. It had been her idea, back when she had been worried about getting stranded somewhere alone at night. She had forgotten about it. I hadn't. I watched the screen as her location updated in real time. My pulse pounded as I saw where she was headed. Not downtown. Not to any restaurant. She was driving in the opposite direction, toward a part of the city we had no connection to. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay calm. Maybe there was still an explanation. Maybe I was misreading things. Or maybe I was about to find out exactly what I had been afraid of all along. The night I found out the truth, I wasn't even supposed to be home. That's what made it so perfect for her. So easy. She had gotten comfortable, careless even. She had convinced herself that she was in control of everything, that her lies were working, that I was still the oblivious husband who trusted her without question. But she had underestimated me. It was late in the afternoon when I decided to leave work early. I told my boss I wasn't feeling well, packed up my things, and walked out of the office with a strange sense of finality. Something was coming. I could feel it. The weight in my chest had grown heavier over the last few days, suffocating me, making it impossible to focus on anything else. My suspicions had consumed me, leaving me restless and on edge. I needed to know. I needed to see it with my own eyes. The drive home was eerily quiet. The city moved around me in its usual rhythm. Cars honking, people crossing streets, conversations blending into the background. But it all felt distant, like I was moving through a dream, disconnected from everything except the certainty that I was about to watch my entire world fall apart. As I pulled into our neighborhood, I immediately noticed something was off. Her car was in the driveway. She wasn't supposed to be home yet. She had told me that morning that she had a meeting in the evening, that she would be out late again. But she was here, and she wasn't alone. A second car was parked right next to hers. A sleek, expensive model. Too expensive. My stomach twisted as recognition hit me like a freight train. I knew that car. I had seen it countless times before, pulling into the office parking lot every morning, occupying the reserved space closest to the entrance. My boss. For a moment, I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my fingers ached. The sound of my own breathing filled the car, harsh and uneven. I wanted to be wrong. I wanted so desperately to be wrong. But deep down, I already knew. I had known for a long time. I had just been too much of a coward to admit it. I stepped out of the car, my movements slow, deliberate. My heart pounded against my ribs as I approached the front door, forcing myself to breathe, to stay calm. The air felt thick, heavy with something I couldn't name. I reached for the handle, turned it slowly, and pushed the door open. And then I heard it. A low murmur. A hushed laugh. The unmistakable sound of a bed creaking upstairs. The house that had once been my home, my sanctuary, now felt like a crime scene. Like I was walking through the ruins of something that had already been destroyed. I moved toward the stairs, my body running on pure adrenaline. With every step, the sounds became clearer, sharper. A moan, a gasp, the sickening rhythm of something intimate, something that wasn't meant for me. I reached the bedroom door. It was half open, swinging slightly from the movement inside. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't hesitate. I pushed it open. And there she was. My wife. The woman I had loved. The woman I had sacrificed for. The woman I had trusted. On our bed. With him. She didn't notice me at first. Neither of them did. They were too caught up in what they were doing, too lost in the moment to realize that their perfect little secret had just been exposed. And then she turned her head. Her eyes met mine, and in that instant, everything shattered. The room was suddenly too small, too suffocating. The air was thick with the scent of sweat, perfume, and betrayal. My pulse roared in my ears, drowning out everything else. Time slowed. I saw the exact moment horror replaced pleasure on her face, the way her mouth parted slightly, as if she wanted to say something, but couldn't find the words. My boss reacted first. He jolted upright, reaching for the sheets to cover himself, as if that would somehow erase what I had just seen. His face twisted into something between fear and arrogance, as if he was caught, but he still believed he could talk his way out of it. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just stared. At her. At him. At the wreckage of my marriage laid bare in front of me. And then, the rage hit. I had always thought that if I ever found myself in this situation, I would react with cold, calculated anger. That I would be in control, that I would handle it like a man who refused to let his emotions get the best of him. But there is no preparing for something like this. There is no rationality in watching the woman you love fuck another man in your own home. On your bed. Something inside me snapped. And in that moment, I knew. I wasn't just going to walk away from this. I was going to make them both pay. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. The kind of silence that suffocates, that presses down on you like a weight you can't shake off. Laura was frozen, her face pale, her body tangled in the sheets like a criminal caught in the act. My boss, her lover, stared at me, wide-eyed, his chest rising and falling as he scrambled to pull the blanket over himself like some pathetic attempt at modesty. But there was nothing they could do to undo what I had seen. I had caught them, and now, I was going to destroy them. I took a slow step forward, my fingers curling into fists at my sides. Neither of them spoke, too stunned to react, too exposed to come up with whatever pathetic excuses they had been rehearsing for months. Laura finally moved first, clutching the sheet to her chest, her mouth opening and closing like she was searching for the right words. But there weren't any. There was nothing she could say that would make this better, nothing that could erase the image now burned into my mind. It's not what it looks like, she started, her voice weak, trembling. I laughed. A sharp, cold, bitter laugh. Not what it looks like. My voice was eerily calm, but my hands were shaking. You're fucking my boss in our bed, Laura. What exactly does it look like? She flinched like I had slapped her. Good. She deserved worse. I turned my attention to him. He had always been so smug, always carried himself like a man who owned everything he touched. But right now, he looked like a coward. Get up. My voice was low, controlled, but dripping with rage. Neither of them moved. I said get up. I roared, making Laura jump and my boss scramble out of the bed, still pathetically clutching the sheet around his waist. I took another step toward him, and he stumbled backward, his confidence completely shattered. I could see the fear in his eyes, the realization that I wasn't just angry. I was dangerous. Put your clothes on and get the fuck out of my house, I spat, my voice sharp as a blade. Now, before I make you regret ever stepping foot in here. He didn't argue. He didn't even try. He just nodded, grabbing his clothes from the floor with shaking hands, dressing as quickly as he could while Laura sat frozen on the bed, her eyes wide, her breath shallow. Once he was dressed, I pointed to the door. Out. And if you ever so much as look in my direction again, I will ruin you. He didn't need to be told twice. He bolted, practically running out of the room, his expensive shoes thudding against the floor as he disappeared down the stairs. The sound of the front door slamming shut was satisfying. But I wasn't done. I turned back to Laura. She was still sitting there, wrapped in the sheets like they could somehow shield her from what was coming. Her eyes were glossy with tears, her lips parted like she wanted to say something, to beg. Pack your shit and get out. She blinked, as if she hadn't heard me. as if she thought there was still a chance to fix this. What? Her voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. You heard me, I said, my voice devoid of any emotion. You don't live here anymore. You don't get to sleep in this bed. You don't get to have anything in this house. Get your things and get out. Tears spilled over her cheeks as she shook her head, her breathing uneven. Please, we can talk about this. There's nothing to talk about, I cut her off, my voice sharp. You made your choice. Now, I'm making mine. She hesitated, as if she thought there was still some way to reason with me. As if she thought I was still the same man who had once loved her. But that man was gone. Without another word, I walked over to the closet and yanked open the doors. Everything of hers was inside. Her designer clothes, her neatly organized shoes, her collection of expensive bags, all the things she had spent years curating, all the things she had bought with my money. And I wasn't letting her take any of it. I grabbed the first handful of clothes I saw and tossed them onto the floor. Then another, and another. Laura gasped, jumping off the bed, rushing toward me with panic in her eyes. Stop. What are you doing? She cried, reaching out to stop me. I shoved her hand away. Not hard, but firm enough to make her stumble back. These don't belong to you anymore, I said, my voice ice cold. Nothing in this house does. You cheated in my home, in my bed, so now, you leave with nothing. She sobbed, shaking her head. Please, don't do this. I made a mistake. I cut her off with a harsh laugh. Asterisk, a mistake? A mistake is forgetting an anniversary. A mistake is burning dinner. Asterisk what you did? That was a choice. A choice you made over and over again. She fell silent, her tears coming harder now. But I didn't care. I grabbed a suitcase from the corner of the room, shoved a few random items inside, zipped it up, and threw it at her feet. That's all you get. Take it and leave. She stood there, trembling, staring at the suitcase as if it were a death sentence. Where am I supposed to go? She whispered. I shrugged. Not my problem. Her lip quivered, but I had no sympathy left. She had destroyed us. Now, she was the one who had to deal with the consequences. I pointed to the door. Get out, Laura. And don't ever come back. She stood there for a few more seconds, waiting for something for me to change my mind, for me to forgive her, for me to tell her I still loved her. But I didn't. I just stared at her, cold and unmoving, until she finally bent down, grabbed the suitcase, and turned toward the door. She hesitated one last time, looking back at me, her face streaked with tears. I'm sorry, she choked out. But I didn't say a word. I just watched as she walked away. And when the door closed behind her, I exhaled for the first time in weeks. Laura was gone. And I was finally free. Throwing Laura out of the house should have brought me peace. Should have made me feel like I had one. But as I stood in the silence of my now empty home, surrounded by the echoes of a marriage that no longer existed, I realized I wasn't done. Not yet. I still had one more score to settle. Because while Laura had been the one to betray me, my boss had made a choice too. He had looked me in the eye for years, shaken my hand, praised my work, and pretended to respect me, all while screwing my wife behind my back. That wasn't just disrespect. It wasn't just betrayal. It was war. And I wasn't walking away without setting fire to everything he had built. I sat down at my desk that night, still running on adrenaline, and opened my work laptop. I had been at the company for years, long enough to know where the skeletons were buried. I had put in more hours than anyone, taken on projects that no one else wanted, cleaned up mistakes that my boss should have been handling himself. And now? Now, I was about to make sure his career collapsed under the weight of his own incompetence. The plan was simple. Before quitting, I would go into the biggest ongoing project, one that was already a mess, and I would make it completely unfixable. My boss was supposed to present it in a few weeks to the board of directors, claiming it as his big achievement. He had been bragging about it for months. Not anymore. I worked through the night, going through every financial report, every analysis, every spreadsheet tied to the project. I miscalculated formulas, changed figures, erased crucial data. I made it look like an accident, a slow-brewing catastrophe waiting to explode. And the best part? Since I was the one who had handled most of the project, no one would notice the mistakes until it was too late. I could already imagine the chaos, the confusion, the desperate scramble to fix what couldn't be fixed. And at the center of it? My boss. His reputation, his credibility, his entire career would take the hit. He would have to stand in front of the board, stammering, sweating, watching. The next morning, I walked into the office as if nothing had changed. My coworkers greeted me, oblivious to the fact that by the end of the day, everything would be different. When I stepped into my boss's office, he was sitting at his desk, acting like he hadn't been caught screwing my wife in my own bed. He looked up at me, a little too quickly, like he wasn't sure if I was about to punch him or play dumb. I did neither. Instead, I placed an envelope on his desk and sat down. "What's this?" he asked, his voice cautious. "My resignation," I said flatly. He hesitated. He wasn't expecting this. "Listen," he started, leaning forward. "I know what happened was a mistake. A lapse in judgment." I held up a hand, cutting him off. "I don't care what you have to say." My voice was calm, controlled. "Deadly. Just accept the resignation and move on." He studied me for a long moment, probably expecting me to snap, to threaten him. But I didn't, because I had already won. He didn't know it yet, but in a few weeks, his entire world was going to collapse. "Fine," he finally said, sighing as he signed the papers. "I'll process it today." I stood up and buttoned my jacket. "Good luck with the board meeting," I said casually as I turned to leave. I didn't have to look back to know that he was watching me go, probably wondering why I was taking this so well. He had no idea what was coming. I never looked back after that day. I packed up my things, walked out of that office for the last time, and left them to deal with the mess I had created. A few weeks later, I got a text from an old coworker. "Dude, boss just got obliterated in the board meeting. They found out about the project errors, and he couldn't explain any of it. They're talking about forcing him to resign." I smirked. Good. He had taken everything from me. Now, I had taken everything from him. And it felt damn good. When I walked out of that office for the last time, I expected to feel something: satisfaction, closure, relief. But all I felt was nothing. Just an overwhelming emptiness, like I had spent so much time chasing revenge that I hadn't stopped to think about what came next. Laura was gone. My job was gone. Everything that had defined my life for years was gone. And yet, for the first time in a long time, I wasn't drowning anymore. I wasn't lying awake at night questioning myself, wondering if I was imagining things, blaming myself for a marriage that had already been over long before I realized it. The betrayal had ripped me apart, but it had also set me free. I had spent so much time chasing stability, building a life around a woman who never truly valued it, who never valued me. And for what? A house that wasn't a home, a job that made me miserable, a relationship that was built on nothing but lies? No, I was done. For the first few weeks, I kept to myself. I ignored Laura's texts. Yes, she tried to reach out, begging, apologizing, saying she had made a mistake. But I never responded. I didn't need to. She had made her choice, and I had made mine. My boss, on the other hand, wasn't as desperate. He was too busy trying to salvage his career. Word spread fast. His board presentation had been a disaster. The company had lost millions thanks to the errors in the reports, and the higher-ups wanted someone to blame. And since he had been the one taking credit for my work all these years, he had no one to fall back on. He was forced to resign. Poetic justice. And as much as I wanted to sit back and bask in my victory, I realized something. None of it mattered anymore. I didn't need to keep tabs on Laura. I didn't need to check if my ex-boss had landed on his feet. They weren't my problem anymore. So, I stopped looking back. I moved out of the house, put it up for sale, and decided I was done being tied to a place that held nothing but bad memories. I had spent so much time fighting to hold on to everything, but in the end, letting go was the real victory. I booked a one-way ticket to a place I had never been before. Somewhere far, somewhere new. Somewhere that didn't have ghosts of a past I no longer cared about. And as I boarded that plane, looking out over the city that had once been my whole world, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Because I wasn't running away. I was finally moving forward,